I pretended to be dying to see which friends would actually care. The results changed everything. Last month, I made what might have been the stupidest decision of my entire life, but it taught me more about human nature than any book or lecture ever could. I decided to fake my own terminal illness just to see who would actually stick around when things got tough. The experiment lasted 3 weeks and completely destroyed my worldview in ways I never expected. It started during one of those late-night scrolling sessions where you question everything about your existence. I was lying in bed at 2 in the morning, going through social media and seeing all these posts about friendship and loyalty. Everyone always talks about having your back, but deep down I wondered if any of my friends would actually be there if something serious happened to me. The thought kept gnawing at me for days until I came up with this twisted plan. The setup was surprisingly simple. I created a fake medical report using online templates and some basic photo editing skills. Nothing too dramatic, just some blood work results that looked concerning enough to warrant further testing. I even researched the symptoms and progression of a rare autoimmune condition to make everything seem believable. The whole preparation took about a week, during which I felt increasingly nervous about what I was about to do. I started by telling my closest friend from college about the suspicious test results. His reaction was immediate and intense. He dropped everything to come over with takeout and spent the entire evening asking questions about doctors and treatment options. For the first time in months, we talked about real things instead of just work and sports. He even offered to drive me to appointments and help research specialists. Watching him genuinely care made me feel simultaneously guilty and grateful. The news spread naturally through our friend group over the next few days. Some people responded exactly how I expected: quick texts expressing concern followed by radio silence. Others surprised me completely. My gym buddy, who I always considered more of an acquaintance, showed up at my apartment with groceries and insisted on helping with household chores. He said he remembered how exhausted his mom had been during her treatments and wanted to make sure I was eating properly. Meanwhile, some of my oldest friends seemed to vanish into thin air. These were people I had known for over a decade, shared countless memories with, and considered part of my inner circle. They would send the occasional message asking how I was doing, but when I mentioned feeling scared or needing support, they would change the subject or suddenly become too busy to respond. The silence hurt more than any physical pain could have. About 10 days into the experiment, something unexpected happened that completely changed the trajectory of my plan. My neighbor, an elderly woman I barely knew beyond polite hallway conversations, knocked on my door with a homemade casserole. She had overheard me talking to someone about medical issues and wanted to help. We ended up talking for hours about her late husband's battle with illness and how important it was to have hope during dark times. Her kindness was so genuine and unexpected that I almost broke down and confessed everything right there. The real turning point came when my brother flew in from across the country without even asking if I needed him. He just showed up at my door with a suitcase, saying he had taken time off work to help me through whatever was coming. Seeing him there, ready to put his life on hold for me, made me realize how selfish and manipulative my experiment had become. The guilt started eating away at me, but I was too deep into the lie to figure out how to back out gracefully. As the second week progressed, I noticed how the fake illness was affecting my own mental state. Constantly thinking about symptoms and doctor appointments, even though they were fictional, was making me genuinely anxious and depressed. I started avoiding social situations because I was afraid someone would ask detailed questions I couldn't answer. The stress of maintaining the lie was becoming overwhelming, and I found myself wishing I had never started this whole thing. Then something happened that I never saw coming. My ex-girlfriend, who I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years, reached out after hearing about my situation through mutual friends. She offered to help coordinate care and support, putting aside all the complicated history between us. Her maturity and compassion reminded me why I had loved her in the first place, and also made me realize how much I had grown since our relationship ended. We spent hours talking about life, forgiveness, and what really matters when everything else falls away. The most shocking revelation came from my workplace. I had mentioned my health issues to my supervisor, expecting minimal response since we barely interacted outside of necessary meetings. Instead, he arranged for modified duties and connected me with resources I didn't even know existed. My coworkers started covering extra tasks without being asked, and several offered to help with medical expenses if needed. The solidarity and kindness from people I considered just professional acquaintances was overwhelming. By the third week, I was drowning in guilt and genuine affection from people who were sacrificing their time and energy for my fictional crisis. My apartment was filled with flowers, cards, and homemade meals from friends and neighbors. People were organizing schedules to check on me, researching treatment options, and some were even planning fundraising activities. The outpouring of support was beautiful and heartbreaking because it was all based on a lie. The moment I knew I had to end the charade came when my childhood friends started a group chat with all my high school buddies to coordinate visits and support. These were people I hadn't talked to regularly in years, but they were all ready to drop everything to help me through this difficult time. Reading their messages filled with love, memories, and promises to be there no matter what, I felt like the worst person alive. Confessing turned out to be the hardest part of the entire experience. I started with the people who had been most supportive, beginning with my brother and closest friends. The reactions ranged from anger and disappointment to confusion and hurt. Some people understood that I was struggling with trust issues and loneliness, while others felt completely betrayed and manipulated. My brother was furious but ultimately forgave me, saying he was just glad I wasn't actually sick. The aftermath was messy and painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. Several friendships ended permanently, with people saying they could never trust me again after such an elaborate deception. Others were more understanding, but needed time and space to process what had happened. My ex-girlfriend was disappointed, but said she hoped I would learn from the experience and seek healthier ways to address my insecurities about relationships. Surprisingly, some relationships actually became stronger after the confession. My gym buddy said he was hurt, but respected that I had come clean instead of letting the lie continue indefinitely. We talked about why I had felt the need to test friendships in such a dramatic way, and he shared his own struggles with feeling disconnected from people. Our friendship became more honest and deeper than it had ever been before. The experience taught me that most people are fundamentally good and willing to help when someone is in genuine need. But it also showed me how toxic my own mindset had become, constantly questioning people's motives and testing their loyalty instead of simply being a good friend myself. I realized that the problem wasn't whether people would be there for me during a crisis, but whether I was creating the kind of relationships that naturally fostered mutual support and trust. Looking back now, I understand that my experiment was really about my own fear of vulnerability and abandonment. Instead of faking a crisis to test others, I should have worked on being more open and genuine in my existing relationships. The people who showed up during my fake illness were the same ones who had been consistently kind and supportive all along. I had just been too focused on my own insecurities to notice. The months following my confession were a period of intense self-reflection and relationship rebuilding. I had to earn back trust from people who had been genuinely hurt by my deception, while also learning to forgive myself for such a misguided decision. Some friendships never recovered, and I had to accept that as a consequence of my actions. But others became more authentic and meaningful than they had been before. I also discovered that my neighbor, the elderly woman who had brought me casserole, had suspected something wasn't quite right about my situation. She had her own health issues and recognized that my described symptoms didn't quite match what someone with my supposed condition would actually experience. But instead of confronting me, she had chosen to show kindness anyway, believing that someone who would fake an illness probably needed compassion more than judgment. The experience fundamentally changed how I approach relationships and friendship. I stopped looking for grand gestures and dramatic proof of loyalty, instead learning to appreciate the small, consistent ways people show they care. A text message checking in, remembering something important I mentioned, or simply being present during ordinary moments became more meaningful than any crisis-driven support. I never did find out what would have happened if I had actually been facing a serious health crisis, but I learned something more valuable. The quality of my relationships wasn't determined by how people would respond to emergencies, but by how we treated each other during normal, everyday life. Building trust and connection requires ongoing effort and vulnerability, not manufactured tests of loyalty. The guilt from my deception lingered for months, but it also motivated me to become the kind of friend I had been hoping to find in others. I started reaching out more consistently, offering help without being asked, and being more honest about my own struggles and insecurities. Instead of testing whether people would be there for me, I focused on being there for them. Now, almost a year later, I can see how the experience changed me for the better, even though I would never recommend anyone follow my path. I learned that trust isn't something you can test or prove definitively, It's something you build gradually through consistent actions and mutual respect. The friends who stayed after my confession weren't the ones who had passed some loyalty test, but the ones who understood that people make mistakes and deserve chances to grow. The most important lesson was that authenticity attracts authenticity. When I stopped trying to manipulate situations to get the responses I wanted and started being genuinely myself, my relationships naturally became more honest and supportive. The deep connections I had been desperately seeking were available all along, but only when I was brave enough to be vulnerable in real and honest ways.